Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's time for Chicago Business Radio. Brought to you by FirmSpace, your private sanctuary for productivity and growth. To learn more, go to firmspace.com. Now, here's your host.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Chicago Business Radio. I'm your host, Max Cantor, and before we jump in today's story, I just want to point out that today's show is sponsored by FirmSpace. Without FirmSpace, we couldn't be sharing these important and interesting stories, so big shout out to them. And I'm excited to talk to the guest that we have today. He is the president, general manager, executive chef, and most importantly, the dishwasher of Milts BBQ for the Perplexed in Chicago, Illinois. Please welcome to the show, Bryan Gryka. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
So just to jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit about Milts BBQ for the Perplexed?
Okay. I guess the short answer is, we've been open for 8.5 years. We opened in January 2013. We're in this very dead center of East Lakeview here in Chicago, about a mile from Wrigley Field. And we've been rocking and rolling for quite a while now. We have some great support from the community, and we've weathered the storm through COVID over the last year or so, and we're still here.
That's great to hear. How'd you guys get started all the way back in 2013?
It was a process. So for people that don't know, we are a kosher restaurant, and there's a big dearth of kosher restaurants in the city of Chicago. We're actually the only ones left the south of Rogers Park, the northern area of the city. When we opened 8 years ago, there were a couple other restaurants, but they're not around anymore. But there is a little bit of a Jewish community around here, and there was a need, for something like what we are offering. And the former owner, Jeff Ader, spearheaded it. He funded the entire venture, and there was a big groundswell of support. And as they say, the rest is history.
Now, I'm Jewish myself, so I'm kind of embarrassed to ask this question, but what is the difference between non-kosher barbecue and kosher barbecue?
I mean, that's a loaded question. I could give the short answer is, most people know that, pork isn't kosher, so obviously we don't have any, many know that we don't have mixed milk and meat. So we don't have any dairy at all on premises. There are dairy restaurants. There are some restaurants that'll have separate milk and meat kitchens, but we're all meat. We do a lot of beef, a lot of chicken, poultry, other poultry, duck sometimes. And, it gets a little more complicated than that. There's certain levels of kosher. So we're on the stricter side. We're certified kosher by the Chicago Rabbinical Council. So they're very supportive of us, and it enables us to have the widest market that I think we can capture, in terms of people that keep kosher, and then obviously people that don't. We try really hard not to advertise overtly that we're hey, we're a kosher restaurant. We try to be a restaurant first that happens to be kosher, which for people that do keep kosher, that's been lacking for many years. It gets very complicated when you really get into the politics behind it.
Is kosher barbecue a national thing, or is what you guys do very niche and very unique, and there's not many restaurants like you?
Well, so when we opened, there was one other kosher barbecue restaurant that closed years ago in Teaneck, New Jersey. So we are the longest standing one. Since then, there's been actually quite a few. Barbecue is very hip these days. So there's half a dozen places in the New York area. There's a couple in the Miami area. There's some in Los Angeles. I mean, it's really just booming because, people see that it works. It's very hard to keep a restaurant surviving, in general. And then when you bring in the cost of kosher food and then the restrictions, we have a lot of days off. Like just this week alone, we were, the Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, we've been closed the last few days. We're just opening up now, and we have a lot of holidays coming up this month, so we're missing most of September. So it's very difficult to keep restaurants functioning. But it's working, and the people are trying to copy our model, which people ask me if I'm bothered by it, and I'm like, I think it's great. I think we show a business model that works, and we were able to succeed. It's really nice to see that others try to emulate that. That's the sign of real success, I suppose.
Now, I know in the Jewish community, brisket is such a big and important food in the culture. Is brisket kind of the go-to dish at Milts?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I've actually talked a lot about brisket, when I give, lectures or other talks. Um, we do a lot of brisket and ribs, our beef ribs. I like them more, to be honest, just because they're unique. They're very beefy, and there's even in the non-kosher, there's very few places in Chicago that do beef ribs at all. But in terms of brisket, yeah, I mean, it's brisket was considered the garbage cut for such a long time that it was dirt cheap, and that there's a lot of again political stuff about that. The Jews in Europe were kind of stuck with the leftovers in a lot of ways, and brisket was part of that. So we learned how to take a cheap cut and make it really good. And now it's brisket's such a big part of Americana. If you go to Texas, it's brisket everywhere because they're it's beef country. But if you look at what we're doing, it's a great cut, and it works really well. There's so many things in its favor, and it's perfect for barbecue, and we love cooking it.
It is perfect for barbecue, and I gotta say, brisket is my favorite cut of meat and my favorite thing to get from a barbecue restaurant. So to hear you talk about it, I mean, I'm over here starving for food. This interview's got me so hungry. But, moving on from food, the most obvious question I have for you is, who is Milt?
So I mentioned our former owner, Jeff Ader. So he just sold the restaurant to us about a year ago. And I can talk about that later. But Milt was his uncle who, like Jeff likes to say, was the irreverent guy that he never got married or had kids. And he was the one that was like super fun. So he was the one that would, while Jeff and his siblings were teenagers, he would sneak them drinks and try to teach them poker and things like that. Just, he was the fun guy. And so he had a special place in Jeff's heart, and he died years ago. I honestly don't know when. I've only seen the one picture. If you go to our website, there's that one picture of Milt. That's literally the only one I've ever seen. So he's it's definitely an enigma for sure.
Wow. I guess everyone has that, Uncle Milt in their life. Everyone has that person. So that's super cool that, he
Right.
named the restaurant after his Uncle Milt. Now, you mentioned that you recently acquired the restaurant a year ago. What was that process like, and what led to that?
Well, I mean, COVID certainly messed a lot of things up, and so I like to joke now that Jeff knew when to sell high. Um, so Jeff, a big part of the restaurant and Jeff's personality is he's really big into philanthropy. He's got enough money at this point. I don't want to call it a midlife crisis, but he's very at a point where he wants to give back, and he's doing a lot of different ventures to give back to the community and to the world at large. And so Milt is part of that at the same time. So he funded the restaurant. Like most restaurants, we struggled at the beginning, and he made sure that we stayed afloat. We were never at risk of ever shutting our doors. And then it got to a point, over the last few years, the restaurant was in the black consistently and doing really, really well. And so he was like, I'm giving back. We were giving money to charity every single month. If you look at our website, if you look at our windows outside the restaurant, we were doing a charity of the month for since we've opened. And so Jeff's like, okay, well, I'm giving money to all these different organizations. Why not give it back to the employees? It just seemed the natural step. And he's like, I did my job. He did the little Mary Poppins thing where he's, okay, my job here is done. You guys are successful. You don't need me anymore. Here's the keys. Enjoy. And that's kind of where that went. And, we announced that publicly in January of last year. And there was a few articles written about that. But, for obvious reasons, the transition, took a lot more time than we were expecting just because of all the shutting down and the financial uncertainty. But we sealed the deal, last year, and here we are.
That's so great that you guys were able to make it through the pandemic. And I know it was so hard for so many restaurants. Was there ever a point during the pandemic where the future looked uncertain? You didn't know kind of what was what? And what changes did you make during the pandemic to make it through for Milts?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. I tend to be more of the, I'm very linear in the way I think, and I'm always trying to think of like worst case scenarios, which, doesn't help with my anxiety, but it certainly helps in terms of operational, which is one thing I think works in my favor in terms of running the place. I'm always trying to think of, the ways to make sure we don't fail. So on one part of me, I was always worried, how long is this going to last? What's going to happen? I'm sure, other business owners, the people that are listening to this, we've all had the same thoughts. It's very nerve wracking. It's hard to sleep at night. But at the same time, we always knew we had Jeff's support. And, I always figured, hey, maybe if it ever got really, really bad, I could be like, hey, I need some cash. We can't succeed. But we never got to that point. We definitely took advantage of the PPP loans. One thing that worked certainly in our favor was that we always did things by the book, in terms of payroll and taking care of our employees. And with the PPP loans, which were geared specifically on the way, payroll was done, is that it worked for us. For the restaurants that paid people cash or, under the table, they got the short end of the stick when it came to the loans. We didn't have that problem. So we definitely took advantage, and that certainly helped. The short answer after that long-winded one is, yeah, I was worried, but not really. We were never anywhere close to, considering shutting the doors.
That's great. That's awesome to hear. And what are some do's and don'ts for people getting started in what you do in the restaurant industry? So someone who maybe wants to be a chef or eventually own their own restaurant.
That's, a lot of it is luck. I can't lie. Right place, right time. And, certainly, that's part of what happened to me. I don't want to say I'm an amazing chef or I'm really, really good at what I do or anything like that. I just, I was right place, right time. I was the right fit for what they needed here. And so for a lot of people, it's, just work, try your best to learn as much as you can, be well-rounded. Obviously I have a cooking background, which I did for a long time, but, since I always, in my last jobs and everything, I tried really hard to pay attention to the books, the back end, all the paperwork for area of it, because, I had to quickly become general manager here, and I had to learn, all the operational side very quickly at the restaurant. And it's different mindsets. The chef is very, right-brained, creative. You're the one that's always fighting the general manager to get a few extra bucks to pay for stuff in the kitchen, little things like that. And then the general manager side is the numbers guy, the one who's, trying to make the restaurant successful. So, these two competing aspects, and you have to be good at both. You have to really pay attention to the things that you're doing. So for people that really want to do it, pay attention to different restaurants, look at, get different, jobs, ask as many questions as you can. I have cooks and employees here where, if they have questions, I will certainly answer them for them. If they want to know what's going on the operational side, I will teach them. A big part of what I do is teaching. So pay attention, try to learn, really try to learn. That's the, I don't know how helpful of an answer that is.
No, that's great. It sounds like on the business side of things, you have a lot of hands in a lot of different pots, no pun intended. And, on the cooking side, ironically, you also have a lot of hands in a lot of different pots, being the chef. So how do you, I know, an important part of a restaurant is you want to keep innovating. You want to bring the new thing out to people to not get stuck, I guess. So how do you invent and innovate new recipes while also keeping in mind to stay kosher?
So that is a little tricky. I was a little more, honestly, since the COVID stuff, I've streamlined a lot, and I'm a lot less willing right now to take risks in terms of, hey, here's a special, because, meat prices and everything are skyrocketing, business is down, and we're less able to weather major losses on specials and food. So, people ask me why I don't do duck specials. I'm like, well, kosher duck is $7 a pound. That means, each bird is $50. And, you just do the math. If I'm doing, I had to sell each duck entree for like $100. People aren't going to spend that right now. So I think being very cognizant of what people are willing to spend, just as an example, today specifically, I have a lot of extra figs from the holiday, and I needed to find a use for them. And so, one suggestion was, hey, let's do a fig bread pudding, because that tastes really good. And I'm like, I would eat that. I think would be very good. But I don't think it would sell. And so I'm turning right now, it's working in the kitchen, is I'm turning the figs into a fig confit, and I'll try to find a different dessert. But one thing is I don't want to waste it. And number two is I will, I want to preserve it so I can save it for a dessert I think would work, like a nice fall dessert. I'll wait for the weather to change. And so I think part of it is being creative and not, minimizing waste. And you hear people talking about that all the time, is minimizing waste and being very focused on that. And so I'll find a good use for it. But, being creative but not wasteful is really tricky. When we're successful and doing really well, it's a lot easier to control. But yeah, I can't risk doing a bunch of veal chops right now if I'm only able to sell one or two a night. And then what do I do with the leftovers? there's a limit to that creativity, to the point where you just either have old meat or you're making stock or some random stuff because you don't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm. How do you create a community, not only for your customers coming in, but for your employees as well?
So for the employees, we have we've treated them well. I mean, with all the closures and stuff, you think about September, and then we're closed for most of this month, and even there's other days. There's a couple weeks earlier in the calendar that we're also closed, and so one thing I've been very cognizant of doing is saving cash and trying to find ways to be able to support our staff even when we're closed or not working, that they know that they're being supported and never going to be nickel and dimed. I've worked in corporate. I've worked in a lot of places where, it's like, if there's time to lean, time to clean, and there people and the employees will nickel and dime their low paid staff, which I have a very, very hard time with. We have employees making, minimum wage or just a hair above it, and you're nickel and diming, quarters of an hour, with them. And I think that's a very caustic and work environment. And I think that's showing now in the labor workforce right now. You hear, all over the place where restaurants are struggling to find, employees, even and all these other delivery drivers and all these other quote unquote low paying jobs who've been basically abused for the most part for decades. And now they feel that they've got some power and they're kind of going against that. We have weathered that. I haven't had any issues. I haven't been trying to hire because I made sure my employees were employed the entire time. I never nickel and dime their hours. If they get overtime, congratulations, you earned it. And that's the way they get rewarded. And then part of it is we also make sure that we give back to them, financially and otherwise.
Well, it sounds like you're creating a really, really great environment to work at Milts. And so for anyone listening, people who want to come try the restaurant and order the delicious food that you're making, what's the best way people can research you and find you?
Obviously, our website would be the first place to go, www.miltsbbq.com. We're pretty active on our Facebook page, not so much on Instagram, but, I'm really poor with that. But yeah, you can see our menu, Google. Our menu's all up there. We got lots of pictures, and yeah, people talk about us, and we're here. Come on by. We're open most of the time.
Yes, definitely, for sure. And Bryan, real quick, right before we sign off, I'm just curious, what's your favorite thing to cook at Milts?
My favorite thing to cook, probably either family meal, which is usually some version of chicken and potatoes, or off the menu. I'm a really big fan of our half chicken. We've been awarded a few times for our smoked chicken. Yeah, it's excellent, and I'm a big fan of it, and I'll eat it over and over again. It's the one item I've never gotten sick of.
Ooh, awesome. Well, I'm excited. The next time I'm in Chicago, I'll be sure to stop by Milts BBQ for the Perplexed. Bryan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thanks, everybody, for listening to another episode of Chicago Business Radio. I'm your host, Max Cantor, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of Chicago Business Radio has been brought to you by FirmSpace, your private sanctuary for productivity and growth. To learn more, go to firmspace.com.